One day I picked up an article from the New York Times, and Marty's pi cycles were suggesting a major market high that Marty had called to the day. So I called him up. I thought that we would have a 2-hour chat, and we were still talking at about 9:30 at night. He was such a wealth of history of markets. And he offered me a job with the title of assistant to the chairman. Well, before I went to Princeton Economics, I did some due diligence on him. I called up Goldman Sachs, and I said, what do you know about this guy? The people at Goldman said, well, he's a big metals trader. We've bumped up against him a few times in the markets. We always thought that we can crush him, but most of the time, he ended up winning. Then I talked to Republic Bank. Marty was one of their very best and biggest futures clients, and they said that they respected him a great deal. So on the back of those two things, I ended up accepting the job offer and going to work for him.
Republic National Bank in New York had a fairly clean reputation at the time. But overseas, in Europe, it was known as the bank for arms dealers and drug smugglers. And it was also reputedly very involved with the Russian mafia. The head of Republic National Bank, Mr. Edmund Safra, very, very wealthy man, somehow, mysteriously, he died in a fire in his apartment in Monaco, right around the time all this was going down with Princeton Economics. Marty wrote a report about the cycles of war, and he predicted some type of international conflict.
Universal Bank of Lebanon. He calls me on the phone, says, listen, we found a book in our basement with all the prices of the Lebanese pound back in the mid-1800s. Could you make a model? I said, sure. Put it into the computer, and the computer says, in 8 days, this thing is going to go ballistic. You got about 8 days. That's it. What he says to me, he says, so what currency do you think would be the best? And I'm like, what? I just told you your country's just going to completely fall apart in 8 days. Now, what's going on here? 8 days later, the Lebanese war begins. I watched it with the Iran-Iraq war. One of our clients over there calls me on the phone. He says, tomorrow, Iran's going to start attacking shipping in the Gulf. What do you think gold's going to do? It's not that the computer is able to predict war. But what happens is, those who do know that they're going to invade something start moving money in advance. So the computer was picking up the capital flows. That is how we were able to forecast the collapse of Russia in '98. We saw about 100 billion in capital flows going in and about 150 billion coming out. So obviously there was something seriously wrong. 6 months later, we found out. The actual government itself moved $50 billion offshore and was hiding it from the IMF so they could get more money.
The CIA called, and I was in the office. And Marty came in afterwards and said, well, they basically want me to give them the model. And I told him to bugger off, that I'm not going to give him anything.
They realized that the model could forecast the rise or fall of a nation. That was geopolitically important to them. That was really what the whole thing was about.
So you can understand why these people want access to his code and his model. If they know where the next war is going to be, then that's very powerful for them. If they get hold of the code, then they would be able to reproduce it. Whether they'd be able to understand it. I could sit down and rewrite the code with Marty, but would I be able to understand it, even though I'm writing it? I think only Marty can really understand those formulas behind everything.
The rumor was Edmund Safra had worked for CIA And Edmund was always pro-bullish on gold and stuff like that, hard metal type guy. They manipulated just about everything. This is how they made money, and that's what I was always objecting about. I was never interested in stuff like that. I was more interested in trying to figure out how this all functioned. We did natural hedging. So we try to balance portfolios in different currencies to try and help preserve jobs. We were the largest in the world, probably a little over $3 trillion. How you doing? This is... I guess we're gonna have to put it over here. It starts in August of 1999. This is when this scheme appears to take over Russia for the commodities, oil, gold. This is what they wanted access to. Edmund Safra's the primary mover, the brains behind this stuff. Edmund was chairman of Republic Bank. They usually do this in groups, but Safra is the one who's up front. All these guys were like somehow behind the curtain, all trading together and stuff like that. Khashoggi, Gaddafi, they were involved. The counter-revolutionary movement for Iran, they were trading commodities to earn money. It was like one giant masquerade party. Nobody was ever whoever you thought they were. They would say, somebody wants you to manage money. Yeah, who? No, I can't say who. You come over and you meet them. Okay, you go over to meet them, and they have a curtain here. You're here, you're not even allowed to see the person. I said, yeah, what is this? You know, forget it, not interested. I go in and know who's on the other side of the curtain. Yes, I believe they took over government. That's the name of the game. That's how they make money. They're not manipulating the whole scheme with a long-term plan. That's not profitable. All they're looking at is how much can I make for this quarter. They're not about to spend a shitload of money for something 20 years down the road.
Unfortunately, you have a very powerful community amongst the investment bankers in New York who do try to rig the game to create a perfect trade at the expense of entire economies. Marty was asked to participate in a Russian bond arbitrage, something to do with the issuance of Russian debt based on the thinking that the political situation in Russia was a shoo-in and that these bonds would never be defaulted on, no matter what, and that there was a guaranteed rate of return to be had, and it was a perfect trade for the investment banking community.
They put on a dinner for the IMF. Edmund Safra did in Washington, D.C. They rented the whole National Gallery. I was invited down there. It was basically to show me that, look, you know, why don't you join us? We got the IMF in our pocket. And, you know, stop going against this all the time. And I said, I'm sorry. You know, Russia's going to collapse. I don't care who you have and who you're paying. It's not going to work.
Marty refused to participate. His economic models, his study of history, international capital flows, all told him that Russia was going to collapse. And lo and behold, we had the Russian financial crisis of 1997-98, where the country effectively went bankrupt and the bonds were defaulted on. The investment banking community that had sought a perfect trade ended up taking a huge bath, and it all blew up in their faces. Marty was the only one who predicted.
They wanted basically to take over Russia. All the commodities, all the oil, etc. That's what they were after. So they're paying off people in the IMF, and the IMF is giving these loans to Russia. If you are rigging the game, you're paying bribes, you're doing all this stuff, then you're not doing risk management. Why do you need risk management if you've paid the bribes and you think you got the shoe in? And then all of a sudden, it doesn't work, everything blows up, and then they go to government and say, well, if you don't bail us out, you're in trouble. So it became a battle between them and me.
A friend of mine had been to a seminar. Martin had been brought to Australia by a broking firm, and he said his trading was quite spectacular. So I just went and found out where the office was and introduced myself. There was something bigger than two people standing there at the time we met, and I was very conscious of that. It was kind of almost like, hey, I'm going somewhere with something here. I don't know where it's taking me, but there's something unfolding here already. And he felt Australia was very important for him to have a footprint here. And in fact, one day, Martin said, do you want to know how the number pi related to the cycles or the reversals? And I said, no, it's yours, just leave it. Martin was outing the players in all these games. I mean, you only had to join the dots. Their whole play and their manipulation fell over. They got caught. And the guys weren't happy about all this stuff he was writing in his reports about them. Marty said, get the fuck out of here. So he's a player in the market. He's exposed that market, but he's also outing these other major market players and their collusion. I don't know the extent to which any one of those characters involved in terms of the desire to shut him down and keep his mouth shut.
The banks controlled pretty much the government. And how they do that is simply that the U.S. government doesn't sell its debt directly. It goes through what is called primary dealers. So it sells the debt to the banks then resell it. So every time they've gotten in trouble, they've said, hey, if you don't bail me out, you can't sell your debt. And this is the control that the banks have had over the government.
It's amazing it's still running. Marty's laptop was maybe the very first one I ever saw.
It has charts on here which Martin Armstrong produced himself. These remain on the computer because they've never been changed, because they've not been updated for 13 years.
The model's still in there. If you tried to break into the operating system and went into an executable file, it'll destroy the hard drive. They never got there. They never got into this.
The security system was that every computer in the entire organization pinged each other to make sure everybody's there. You take one out, something's wrong, somebody's missing, self-destruct, everything was wiped out.
Some of Marty's systems were under attack, and we built honey traps to try to track these people back. Obviously, we were backtracking to certain IP addresses in Langley, Virginia, that were allocated to government agencies.
Tony, probably one of the best hackers I've ever seen in my life. Tony creates a system and left little openings. So somebody coming in trying to attack says, aha, I got in. But they're in this fake computer with all fake information in there, and then we can watch and see what they're doing. All right?
Marty always talked about this club, and it involved Edmund Safra, and I was invited to be a member of the club, and I turned them down because I didn't want to. Marty sometimes takes it a step further and says, well, you know, Edmund Safra got killed for that. Maybe. It's possible. If I ever wrote a novel, I'd probably try to weave it in, but it also might just be Marty taking things one step beyond reality and making a really good story.
At the times I was practicing as a barrister in Sydney, and Martin and Nigel put together a corporate finance team in Australia and invited me to join them. I met them at a beach house that Martin owned. Martin didn't actually live at that home. He lived with his mum. A man of substance, with a Ferrari and a beach house, who lived with his mum and drove an old Toyota. It was the annual party for his staff. The whole crew worldwide. The office staff, high-profile people. He was using that as a marketing exercise to promote his models and his forecasts. They would go from 3 o'clock in the afternoon through to whatever time the next day. Some people were enjoying themselves.
UK, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and the US. Everyone was there, and then he would invite the brokers from Republic. Bill Rogers, the guy at Republic, rocks up in a big stretch limo. It's full of beer in the back seat. And you just see this guy's out of control. Yeah.
These fellows were almost larger-than-life bad American miniseries of what a flash Wall Street money man was like. You turned up in a car that was a block and a half long. They had cigars going, bottles of champagne in the car. I just thought it was humorous, but that's what they chose.
Bill Rogers was the broker from Republic. And I did notice from 98 on, yeah, he just run his own game. Now that's what came out.
I talked to him, he was at his beach house, and I called him up and said, you know, Marty, you know, what's going on? And he said, as I remember it looks like my broker has been stealing from me.
I remember one time, I guess it was right around the start of all of it, and I went down to the beach house and he said, you know, like, you know, things aren't good. You just had a feeling like something was wrong, and then it just happened so fast. It was very, you know, it was scary because you just knew that he was concerned.
The guys at Republic We're illegally trading in the accounts. All this nonsense is starting then. If you have money in the account, they sweep the accounts each day, and they sell that money at night. They get paid back within 24 hours. It's called parking. They're making extra money on that, but then they put the notes back in the wrong account. Monday morning, I went to my lawyer, giving them 1 week to return the money or we would file suit. So I called Republic, said, look, I want to sit down and talk what the hell's going on. But something must have already happened because they said Safra has left for security reasons and went to Monaco. So you can't go see him. And Safra is killed December 3rd. I didn't realize that they were actually blackmailing Yeltsin at the time. And this is why the club keeps blowing up. All of a sudden, it doesn't work. Every time, it's the same thing. It's August 1999. Yeltsin's going to run for election in 2000. I believe they were trying to get Russia in their grasp by forcing Yeltsin to step down and putting one of Safra's friends in there. Baryshnovsky is part of their deal to appoint him as president. Baryshnovsky owned in Russia the TV stations, Arafat, and to get Yeltsin to take $7 billion from the IMF loans. And then that money is going to Geneva under the pretense of being a fee for refurbishing the Kremlin. The wire is steered through Bank in New York, when Republic is the #1 bank that all this Russian stuff always goes through anyhow. So it's strange that this one $7 billion goes through Bank in New York. Now, Safra runs to the government and says, oh, it looks like Bank of New York just did a $7 billion money laundering. Now, they threaten Yeltsin. You're not going to run for election in 2000. Otherwise, all this is going to come out that you stole $7 billion from the IMF. So, Yeltsin realizes he's been set up. They then say, look, we'll protect you, but you resign. August 27th is the day they take the money out of our accounts. I go to my lawyers that